There's a great story of this fellow who has a parrot whose language is simply intolerable. Constant swearing. The bird's a real pistol. That bird can swear for 5 minutes straight without even repeating himself. Now the trouble is, this guy who owns him is very quiet and conservative, and the bird's foul mouth is driving him crazy. So one day it just gets to be too much, and the guy grabs the bird by the throat and he shakes him and he says, "Quit it!" But this just makes the bird even angrier, and he swears more. Then the guy gets angry and says, "Okay for you," and he locks the bird in the kitchen cabinet. This really aggravates the bird, and he claws and scratches. When the guy finally lets him out, the bird cuts loose with a stream of vulgarities that would make a sailor blush. At that point, the guy is so angry that he throws the bird into the freezer. Now, for the first few seconds, there's a terrible din. The bird kicks and claws and thrashes. Suddenly, it's rather quiet. At first, the guy waits, but then he starts to think maybe the bird is hurt. So after a couple of moments of silence, he's so worried, he opens up the freezer door, and the bird meekly climbs onto the man's outstretched arm, and he says, "I am terribly sorry about all the trouble I've caused you. I'll do my best to improve my vocabulary from now on." The man is astounded at the transformation that has taken place, the change this bird has gone through. And then the parrot looks at him and he says, "By the way, what did that chicken do?" It's state fair time. The kids are going back to school. We've been worried about Irene for a few days. I thought maybe we'd need a little bit of humor. But in all humor, there's always a lesson to be learned. There's always some truth. That parrot found it very difficult to be transformed without the awareness of some consequences. Jesus constantly calls us to transform our lives. And it takes a lot for us to change and to be renewed and to be transformed. There's another great story that's a true story. A bank robber in Minneapolis told the arresting police officers that he had been converted at a Billy Graham crusade, and that's why he didn't use a weapon during this holdup. Not much of a conversion. Certainly, there was no transformation. The author of Romans today says to us, "Do not conform yourselves to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect." And what's that great phrase in Matthew's gospel that we've heard so often from Jesus? What profit would there be to gain the whole world and forfeit one's life? The scriptures are always calling us to transformation, to renewal. The scriptures confront us often as to whether we are selling out, for whatever reason it might be. And I think we all know we don't have to look far, just read the papers or watch the news for those who do sell out. In early July, the best-read newspaper in the English-speaking world printed its last paper, News of the World. A media giant, it collapsed. It collapsed because of what many called a sinful bent in the human heart in their quest for success. It seems they hacked into the phone of a 13-year-old abducted girl, apparently paying off the police officers. And the action interfered with the ongoing police investigation. And we're told that this is the tip of the iceberg of other hackings into the lives of terrorist victims, the war dead, and many other public figures. The paper came back to us and gave us somewhat of a confession. This is what they said. We praised high standards, but some who worked for us or in our name fell shamefully short of those standards. Quite simply, we lost our way. Well, I think any of us at any time in our lives, or at some point in our lives, might be able to say we've lost our way. We're all very human. We're all imperfect. It would be easy for any of us to go after gaining the whole world and losing our souls. And so each day, each one of us is challenged to transform our lives, to be aware of the temptations all around us, to try to move beyond these temptations of the world today, to be successful at all costs, to give in to all of our desires and wants, no matter who will be hurt because of it. In an interesting article in the Washington Post that's entitled, "And It Can Happen in America Too," Howard Kurtz argues that the media in this country isn't much better than that in Britain. He writes that it's all about sensational news. And he blames us, the public, who hunger after juicy stuff, and that we're not too particular about what gets unearthed. Lots of people sell their souls for juicy gossip at the cost of putting energy into what's most important in life. I think we all know that there's a tremendous need for renewal, for conversion, for transformation all over our world. In our Congress, in our church, in medicine, law, education, the financial markets, and each one of us. We're all imperfect. We're all sinful. Each one of us is capable of selling ourselves out for the best profit. So it's a challenge to be consistently reflective about the choices that we make and be aware each day that every single day we need to be involved in conversion. We need to be aware of our sins and not just look at the sins of other people. So often we just love to know what other people's sins are, and it keeps us away from knowing what we need to work on. And every day we're called to be aware of that so we don't become the next victim of that shadow part of ourselves. There, but for the grace of God, go each one of us. The author, Catherine Stockett, wrote an intriguing novel that has now become what I think is a really must-see movie entitled The Help. It's about black maids working for white women in the state of Mississippi in the 1960s. A young white college graduate writes a book of stories about these black maids. There's a great scene in the movie where the mother of this writer has won an award from the women of the American Revolution. And she's hosting them at her home when the daughter of her black maid, just casually, as she always did, walks into the dining room. Because the family always treated the maid and her children very equally. But this totally offended the president of this American Revolutions group. And because she was so offended, the mother of this author gave in, sold out, and she fired the maid and threw the daughter out of the house after 29 years in order to save face with her racist friends. The movie in some ways is controversial, but very challenging, and tremendous transformation and change and renewal takes place, even in the mother of this young writer. Many of you may be aware of the lead singer of U2, whose name is Bono. And he has written about his own spiritual formation. And he said something very interesting. He wrote, "Your nature is a hard thing to change. It takes time. I have heard of people who have life-changing, miraculous turnarounds, people set free from addiction after a single prayer, relationships saved where both parties say, 'Let go and let God.' But it was not like that for me. For all of those, I was lost and now I am found. For me, it's probably more accurate to say, I was really lost. I'm a little less so at the moment, and then a little less and a little less again. That to me is the spiritual life, the slow reworking and rebooting the computer at regular intervals, reading the small print of the service manual. It has slowly rebuilt me in a better image. It has taken years, though, and it's not over yet. It's not over yet for any of us. That slow reworking and rebooting of the computer at regular intervals. That's the challenge for all of us. To each and every single day ask ourselves, am I selling out in some way? Am I making choices that are destroying a marriage or a vocation? Am I being unjust in my business practices? Am I being unfair and intolerant with those around me? In what ways do I need to be transformed today? And David Brooks, in his book, The Social Animal, reminds us that having the information alone is not enough, because that won't change us. That self-delusion often takes over our lives. So it's a daily working on it, integrating it into our spiritual lives, a daily awareness, and taking some action steps to change. That parrot was startled when he saw that frozen chicken next to him. So we have to ask ourselves if that's what it's going to take for us to enter into change or renewal. Or maybe we'll change just a little bit, like the burglar who didn't use a gun in the second holdup. It takes a lot to renew ourselves. It will take a lot to renew our world. But every day we do need to ask ourselves, what profit will there be if we gain the whole world and lose ourselves and lose our souls?